Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. I work with people to help them step into effective leadership and realize their professional and personal goals. If you have known failure and success, if you have had good bosses and bad bosses, if you are a high achiever and want new ideas, and if you want the practical and tactical side of things, then you are in the right place. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. And today's guest is Lawrence Coburn. Lawrence, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you for having me.
Where are you at today? I know you're traveling a lot, but are you home based today?
Yeah, I'm in my home, San Francisco, California. Just sitting in front of the computer.
Beautiful. So you're well known in our space, in the chief of staff space, but just in case people haven't heard of you, you are the founder and CEO of Ambient. So can you just give people a brief background of who you are and how you got to found that company?
Yeah, I'm a longtime founder. I've never really had a real job. So I've always started stuff and founded a couple of small ones that folks probably haven't heard of, and then founded one that sort of took off. We raised a lot of money. We became a market leader. And one of the most impactful things that we did is we hired a chief of staff during our hyper growth years. And it was very helpful for me. So I became sort of a big fan of the role, did a lot of research as founders do. We sort of go down the rabbit hole. I interviewed a couple hundred chiefs of staff, learned a lot.
Wow.
And the last thing I'll say is that I think if I wasn't a founder, I think I'd want to be a chief of staff. So I'm not a chief of staff, but I have a profound interest in the role.
Interesting. That's different because most people are, I'm the visionary, I'm out in front, and chief of staff is more behind the scenes. So it's not often you get those traits in the same person, but that's very interesting. So is this Matt we're talking about?
Yeah, and I'll tell the quick story of Matt and the chief of staff role. So the company that I founded was called Double Dutch. It was basically, if you haven't heard of it, it was a mobile event app company. So we emerged right around the same time as the iPhone, and we had an insight about the world, which were conferences and events were about people, not about content, not about the agenda. So at the time, there were lots of mobile event apps, and they were all putting the agenda on the phone, and it was cool and helpful. But we decided to make essentially an ephemeral social network, and we could not have existed before the phone. We hit the market at the right time. It felt like nothing else in the market, and we exploded. Like we grew so fast, like 0 to 20 million in revenue in like 18 months, something like that.
Wow.
Well, during that growth trajectory, everything broke. I was sort of a rookie founder. And even though my executive team was amazing, we had so many exceptions. We had so many things that were falling between the cracks that one of my investors recommended that we hire a chief of staff. And as luck would have it, we had the perfect guy. So when we were tiny, before our growth spurt, we had hired an intern from Harvard Business School who he had done a couple of years at Bain Consulting before. And he was just like a super quick on his feet, smartest guy in the room, really helpful. Just like he came in when we were early stage and he would just do all the stuff that nobody else would do. And he built good relationships with the founding team. He was technical enough. He had taken a couple of kind of computer science classes at Harvard, but he was primarily a business guy and he had the consulting background. So he could jump around, he could make slides, he could do a little bit of everything. And so he went back to school. The company started exploding. My board said, you need to hire a chief of staff because like one of my skills is that I'm pretty good with customers and investors, like external facing stuff, but someone's got to help the trains run on time. And so we asked him to come back and to be our chief. That's sort of the context for the story.
Thank you for that. I want to dig into a few things you said. The board recommended you get a chief of staff. So just curious, do you happen to know where they heard about it or why they thought it was a good thing?
Yeah, we had a pretty famous and influential board because we were growing so fast. We had like Bessemer, we had one of Peter Thiel's funds, we had who else? KKR at some point. And so we had some very experienced folks around the table. and they knew what to do. Like, stuff's falling between the cracks and you want to go external. Well, you either hire a COO or chief of staff, and COO doesn't seem like the right fit. You need someone who's going to be consigliere with you, kind of an extension of you while you're in Amsterdam at the EMEA office, or in Hong Kong at the APAC office. And so that they knew what to do, which is what good boards do. They have pattern recognition on this stuff.
Exactly. Okay, so that came highly recommended. You knew a guy. You brought Matt back. And what was that like when he came back in the company in a different role? Was he right away? You came in as chief of staff, where before he was an intern?
There's an important detail here. So Matt had his grad school paid for by the consulting firm he worked for before.
Okay.
And so for him to come back to us and not the consulting firm meant that he had to pick up the tab for school. And it was a pretty intense moment,
Yeah.
obviously. And so it was a huge bet. It was a huge deal for his family. It was a huge bet for him to come back to us. So I had this sort of like, he made this gift coming in, which is like, I'm all in. Not just symbolically, he was all in on the company's success. And so there's a lot of trust building in that. The other thing he had coming in is that he knew the founding team. Like, we knew his girlfriend, uh,
He was part of
early
the
teams
family.
seem to hang out socially. So like, he came in like family. And so there's a trust level advantage that he had. And I believe that most chief of staff hires should happen with some connection. Because I think the trust matters so much in this role. And so he had that in droves. A lot of stuff that he had earned along the way. So yeah, he came in and I did not do something which I advise anyone hiring a chief of staff to do, is like to really explicitly define the role coming in, and just so that everyone is clear about what a chief of staff is and what a chief of staff isn't, because the role can vary so much. We didn't do that, of course. And so we just sort of figured it out as we went along. And again, we relied on the trust. And it was really up to him. And what he did really well is like, he went out and spoke to a lot of experienced chiefs of staff, and he read a lot of material that was out there. And he basically explained to me what the role should be and what the role should not be. And I think the risk is with that role is you become an easy button for the org. Just because that role is really good at getting stuff done doesn't mean they should do everything. So.
Yes, and there's so many great things you packed in there. So I think defining the role and keeping that as an ongoing conversation is something that I've seen be helpful, because as you know, the company evolves, your role as CEO evolves, and the chief of staff role evolves too. So almost level setting or checking in with principal and chief of staff and the rest of the leadership team. Hey, here's the mandate for chief of staff, or the scope or the main priorities, is a good ongoing conversation to have. And yeah, I would be interested in how you utilize Matt at the beginning, even though you didn't have maybe a clear or a fulsome picture at the very beginning. How did you deploy him in the company?
Yeah. So I wish I knew now. I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish I had done the work back then before I hired the role. There's a framework from a Crystal Group that I really like, which is it's like a 4-quadrant framework where you start like, the first thing you have to do as a chief is you have to take care of the principal. You have to unlock them for greatness. You have to make them more productive. And if you don't do that, nothing else matters. And if you have command on that, you can start to think about unlocking the C-suite, the leadership team, to function as a team, to execute better, to not drop balls, to be accountable. And if you nail that, you can start to think about unlocking the larger org, the company. Like, what are the things that you can do? The strategic planning process, OKRs. Like, can you start to actually bring your chief of staff magic to the full org? And if you can do those 3 things, you earn the right to be in the foxhole with the principal. You have full access to all the important business context. You're essentially an extension of the principal, and you've earned the right to be that consigliere. So they had this sort of, it's not a wheel, but it's like a 4-quadrant box. And I like that. Where Matt came in is he was already in the consigliere box. Like he had already made it there just by virtue of being there in the earliest days. And winning my trust and all that kind of stuff. So I used them like that from the get-go. The hardest decisions, the most sensitive information, he was in my immediate circle with my co-founder, with my CTO, like the key people at the heart of the company. He was in those conversations from day one. So I don't think every chief of staff has that luxury. They have to earn that. And Matt had to earn it too. He just did it as an intern. So yeah, I'll pause there. Is that kind of along the line? So the kinds of stuff he worked on with me, the stuff that had to go well, like the financings, like the data rooms, the modeling. We did some acquisitions. Where do we open up our next office? Is it Phoenix, Austin, Texas, New York City, Maryland, or the Pacific Northwest? Go, give me an analysis. Like, why should it be where it was? Like the big transformational dial moving stuff that did not land clearly in anyone else's box, or the stuff like pricing that spanned multiple lanes. And I needed like an unbiased, arbiter to come in and say like, yes, I understand product's perspective on this, but I also understand marketing's perspective on this. And I also understand the sales rep's perspective on this. Someone to sort of like bridge those gaps. So yeah, he worked on the most important stuff.
And I think when you're in that stage, early stage where you are acquisitive, a chief of staff they can serve the company and the team really well in part of that strategic planning and discussions. Which one of these do we take on? What are the pros and cons? And then also when you decide to pull the trigger on one or a couple, the integration of those two companies, because it all looks nice on a spreadsheet and synergy that. But when it gets down to it, someone has to integrate the tech platforms and figure out the redundancies on the teams and all of those things. And I think that's where a chief of staff can help out.
Totally. It's mission critical, and there's no exec whose job is that. You don't just have an exec standing by to do that. Like you have this floating exec in a senior chief of staff that does exactly that kind of stuff.
Yes. And something I'm curious about, when you say you kind of go through the 4 quadrants and then you earn the right to be the consigliere and get all the access, I've heard some people say, well, I need the access first. If I'm not privy to that information, I can't serve the principal best or serve the leadership team best. So I'm just wondering where you see those two things balancing or both coming in.
I think as a chief of staff, it's not enough to be smart and to have an opinion. You need to be plugged into the execs. You need to be plugged into the team. And I think that's why there's this progression in the McChrystal model, where like you can't be a consigliere until you are deeply embedded in the org. And so, yeah, there's a lot of smart chiefs of staff out there, but, opinions are opinions. Like you got to be in the weeds.
And then it was interesting when you said there has to be some sort of connection between a principal and chief of staff. So a previous connection. I've had so many chiefs of staff come in cold, so to say, where it's the very first role of a chief of staff at the company ever. It's their first time meeting their principal in the interview process. And it's how do you build that trust in the first 90 days? And it's an effort, it's work. So you're suggesting all things being equal, have some sort of connection or trust built up with that person. Are you saying all things being equal, or are you saying it's a must have? You must have that before you hire.
I'm not saying it's a must have. I think you can get there kind of organically or through brute force. And but I think it helps a lot. I think the way trust works with humans is that you can't fake it. You can't shortcut it. I remember when I hired a CRO, which is a hugely important role as well. I was working with a very seasoned executive recruiter, and he took me aside and he basically said, the first 90 days with this gentleman needs to be about building relationships. Like meet his family, have his family over. Like you all are going to be in these intense moments. And I like now as sort of a gray hair founder, like, you kind of have to do that with all of your key people. Like, cause like it's such a rocky road and you got to have trust that gets you through the rough patches. But because of how intimate the chief of staff relationship is, like you definitely want to do that stuff there. And you can do it by luck. Like I did it with like intern early days, all the ups and downs right there. We're all in the same room. or you can do it by, okay, I'm hiring a chief of staff cold. 90 days, yes, we have to get her or him plugged into the business, but we have to get her or him plugged into me. And you have to be intentional about that.
Once you had Matt on board as chief of staff and he was working on these big initiatives, cross functional, move the needle, how did his role evolve over time?
Yeah. Well, it flexed and surged into the biggest, like whatever the big things we were working on. Matt would be someone that we could plug in to give more juice. So I don't know. It was like definitely king of the special projects for sure. But things that he really started to go in on and own were things like growth, like beyond product and beyond marketing. Actually sort of zooming out across the whole surface area of the business is like, what can we tweak to grow a little faster, whether it's pricing or whether it's features or, so that I think that was an area of interest for him. And I think it's a good skill set I think it maps pretty well to a chief of staff skill set. Other things that he became sort of subject matter expert on are pricing. Again, that's one that's such a unique beast. You never feel like you have it right. It's constantly iterating. Yeah. Yeah, I think those are two areas that like became things that he wanted to sort of own. And then eventually it starts to bleed into operations. Like how can you actually how can everybody feel like they have some ownership into what the company is trying to do and mapping the strategy to the execution, like that whole sort of strategic planning process.
Operationalizing the
Part
strategy. Yes. Yes.
Operate, yeah. We literally built this thing called SOAP, which is like strategy on a page that Matt would run, like a one pager that would go out to our 250 employees. Like, this is what we're trying to do, and these are the big initiatives that we're going to go to get there. Here's how you plug in.
Yes. Beautiful. In terms of pricing, did you have the CRO in seat when Matt was helping? Was Matt working in conjunction with sales and sales operations and finance? How did that go?
Yeah, pricing never goes away as a project. In my experience, it's always kind of lurking out there. Like when in bad quarters, your reps are going to be like, "Oh, we're too expensive," and quarters where the velocity is there, but the dollars are like, you always think you have it wrong. So yes, Matt was involved in those conversations pre CRO, post CRO, while we were
Okay.
hiring the CRO. Yeah,
Okay. And then you had mentioned, I wish I had done this earlier. I wish I had defined the role more clearly earlier with Matt, with myself, with the leadership team. Eventually, how did you do that? Did you say, okay, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. Here's what Matt's working on. Here's the things he should not be working on. Was that a conversation or did that just kind of.
he did it. He did it. He wrote himself a job description, walked me through it, and I'm like, "Yep, sounds good. Let's go." So,
Okay. And then how did you get that message out to leadership teams? Because this is a big question I get from chiefs of staff and also executives. I'm clear. Like if I'm an executive, I'm clear with my chief of staff what your
yeah,
role is. But how do I make sure my leadership team is informed and hopefully bought into that as well?
yeah. I think I remember taking time at one of our sort of leadership meetings, like our staff meetings, and walking through what the role was, and Matt walking through the job description. We definitely did stuff like that, and if we didn't, it was just like Matt was confident enough and I had his back enough that he could say to a powerful exec, like, I understand why you want me to do that, but like, I'm working on this, this, and this. And like, this is not part of the thing that I do. And he didn't do like it's not my job thing very often. Like he was a very solutions oriented guy. Like he tried to figure out a way to get there, but, yeah, he had backbone. So
And one element I want to talk about is the sentiment of I have your back. You can go out and you can go to the mattresses with someone or you can make a decision on my behalf because I need you to move things forward. And if it comes back to me, I have your back. Is there any sort of conversation or sentiment around that you would want to get out to other executives? Hey, if you have a chief of staff and you do empower them and you say go, and then they go, and there's going to be points of friction, what happens when those events occur?
yeah, I mean, as a founder or a CEO, you kind of have to have all of your people's backs. So yes, there's a special backing for the chief when they're sort of kind of mucking their way through a thorny special project that with not a lot of history and not a lot of guardrails. There's a special sort of backing that they need. I think that that comes naturally if the relationship is clearly there and the trust is there. I think it's not an artificial thing for me. If I believe in what they're trying to do and how they're doing it, it's not a hard thing for me to have their back publicly. I think there's a particularly interesting related dynamic with the chief of staff where when times get really hard, as a founder, you feel like you're on an island. And even your closest execs, you have to take with a grain of salt the things they are asking you to do, because everyone is balancing the good of the company with what's good for themselves. And as they should, right? Everyone has their own personal brand, their own career track to manage. And so there's a case to be made that if you're an executive at a company and you can triple the headcount of your team, that's a very good signal for your next job. That just shows that you are entrusted with all these company resources and you can manage a large team. That's a skill set that many, particularly junior execs, want. I want to manage a huge team, right? It's not often the best thing for the company. So as a founder, you're constantly having to say, okay, I understand that they want this new budget. They want this headcount, these more resources. They want to own this big project that's not in their lane. Like I understand why they want that stuff, but it might not be best for the company. The cool thing about the chief is that because they don't have direct reports, they don't have their own budget. Really, they don't have, I believe them when their success is tied to the company's success.
Yes.
And so it's almost like their power comes from their lack of power. Their influence comes from their lack of structural influence. And it's such a weird dynamic with that role. So I think there's a natural trust that comes with just the lack of structure of that role. So I don't know. It's something that makes the trust relationship easier because you're not having to tell them no when they want to hire 5 engineers or 15 salespeople in Hong Kong or.
I think you're right, though. It's 100% aligned to what's best for the business. So I talk to chiefs of staff and say, you're not on anyone's side per se. You're on everyone's side because you want what's best for the business as a whole. And if you have a chief of staff who is 100% locked into that and demonstrates that again and again and again, the executives around the leadership team might not agree with that point in that particular case because it kind of goes against their function area, but they see what the chief is doing and they can respect, okay, we're moving this forward as a leadership team for the betterment of the company overall. So I think that is a strong position to be in as a chief of staff. And I like the sense of freedom it gives you and influence and power in that way. So you mentioned, so you kind of seem like you were pretty hands off with Matt. Matt had my trust. He had the keys to the kingdom. He was going out being my proxy. What was the best check-in cadence or, hey, let's make sure we're updated on the priorities or we know what's going on in different areas? What were the best touch points with your chief of staff?
Oh, we talked all the time, multiple times a day, even when I was on the road. Of course, we had standing, weekly one-on-ones, and we had the meetings that we ran together and all that kind of stuff. But we were joined at the hip.
Very cool. So thank you for sharing that because a lot of people love to hear from the executive's perspective, their take on the chief of staff role. Tell us a little bit about Ambient.
Yeah. And so Ambient was in part inspired by my appreciation for the role. It started off with the belief man, couldn't everybody have a chief of staff? If could AI unlock a world where everybody could have a chief of staff? And so you could sort of think of that almost that as like a chief of staff replacement, product development strategy. We quickly backed off of that because as we dug into the interviews and the trust and the consigliere and the almost like the counselor for the principal piece of the role, that didn't feel in reach to us for AI in the near future. So we instead focused on how do we augment the chief of staff role. And so we started off by just very simple goal. Can we give 10 hours back a week by automating some of the important things that the chief of staff is doing today that are maybe not the most strategic? And as you know, the role can vary quite a bit. So the workflow that we zeroed in on is that most chiefs of staff have to facilitate at least one, maybe more meetings per week, mostly internal operations. It's usually the staff meeting or the special project meetings. Could we, and they have to build the agenda, they have to capture the next steps, they have to distribute the next steps, they have to follow up on the next steps. Could we take that workflow and use AI to automate? Because AI seem to be really good at summarization and extracting things and all that kind of stuff. And so our first feature was essentially a meetings note taker, but with the note taking not the most important thing. The most important thing being the project owners, the projects, the timelines, the due dates, the priority, that kind of thing. And so we zeroed in on extracting that stuff from any live meeting and then delivering it in a format that the chief could understand. And many of the chiefs that we spoke to were using the same framework, which is called the Eisenhower Matrix. It's a 2x2 framework by urgency and importance. Many of them would have it in a paper notebook. And so we're like, okay, we're going to build a beautiful software version of that where you can drag and drop, you can drill down into things, you can assign things, you can route, you can push things into Asana or ClickUp or whatever your project management system is. You can change the metadata. So all of that task extraction, routing, follow-up, sharing, we made it all seamless. We made a design decision to keep the chief of staff in the loop, as they say, because chiefs of staff tend to be control freaks and they don't want the AI just going out and sending stuff out without them having eyes on it. So that's been an important design decision. So that was the first feature. And that got us out to the races. We get like 75 customers, something like that. We are now testing our second big feature, which we're going to be announcing on stage at the Operators Guild Summit Thursday of this week in Denver, which is email as a data source. So the ability to forward any email thread to Ambient and have us work our task extraction magic, pull out a matrix of tasks, project owners' timelines, and then start to combine those tasks with what's coming from meetings into a project level view. So I'll pause there for a second. You following me?
Yes. So to recap, user flow for chief of staff. I get Ambient. It joins my Zoom meetings, let's say. It not only records it, but it places things in the Eisenhower matrix afterward. I can look at it and then send it out to the participants of the meeting. So it helps us keep on track. It saves me time because I don't have to do as copious of notes and I don't have to do takeaways. It's all done for me with a few drag and drop pieces. And then I can also now forward certain emails to add to certain projects and maybe tag it as such, or does Ambient look at all my inbox
you're
and
getting
pull
it.
out? Okay.
So so you can think about the chief of staff as sort of the bridge between the strategy and the execution. Like they almost serve the role of a piece of software where mapping the strategic plan and the key initiatives of the company with the work getting done. And so we're doubling down on that with AI, where we want to build out the tool set of the chief of staff in playing that bridge role. And so we're starting at the execution layer. So meetings, we just added email and we're going exactly where you said, which is, okay, if I'm the chief of staff, I need to have a handle on the status, the red, yellow, green status of any strategic initiative at this company. And we're going to use AI and we're going to take a shot at generating that red, yellow, green. We're going to look across all the work getting done across the company, and then we're going to generate a red, yellow, green.
Okay. So if I'm a chief of staff, does it filter everything that comes in my inbox, or am I, as a chief of staff, forwarding things to, Ambient, info at Ambient or whatever, and tagging that with the project? So, okay, in a flash, I could say, just put this in Ambient, it'll sort it, put this over here, this has to do with this, and you can go rapid fire through your inbox.
That's a good subtle design question. One of the obstacles that we're dealing with is that the chief of staff is privy to so much confidential information that we did not feel comfortable asking for a carte blanche connection to their email. So we made the decision, we're going to depend on you to forward us the stuff that you need help grokking. So it's a forward gesture right now. If you have an email thread of 25 emails and there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to get done in there and you're worried about dropping balls, just forward it our way and we'll help you parse it.
Okay. Because that's easy, because it's like all these different notifications or different things aren't relevant per se to a project, but I can pick the ones and literally just as easy as forwarding it, and Ambient will do its thing.
Do its thing. Exactly. And after this call, I'll share with you the email address. We're not sharing it out yet publicly, but
Okay.
so you can start playing with it.
Yes, and I've seen the Eisenhower matrix, and I've used that part of the back end interface, and it's really slick. And I think if you did have build it out to a point where you had a dashboard of, okay, here's my projects, and the calls are being picked up and sorted into the different projects, and the forwarded emails are being picked up and sorted into the different projects, that would become a pretty robust dashboard. And then I'm wondering too if other members of the team can also forward things. Hey, this has to do with project X, Y, and Z from my perspective. And you keep getting data fed in like that.
You're reading from the playbook. This is the dream. So, what we offer up is time savings in exchange for access to meetings,
Okay.
access to email. Our next value prop, this is actually the parallel value prop right now, is you have a lot of balls in the air. If you drop things, it could be really bad. So we're going to be an AI backstop to help you to not drop things. Now it starts to become, all right, can we start to auto organize the things that are happening in your day-to-day work and map them to the projects that are dial moving for your business and give you status reports as opposed to having to run around the C-suite and
Oh my
ask for
gosh.
updates on these complex projects? Can we do it with a tap of a button? And so to think about that in terms of what are the markets we're going after? Well, C-suite spend $1 trillion a year on management consulting. Not exact, $1 trillion a year
Yeah.
compared to like project management, which is a $7 billion a year category. So we think that, one of the things people are spending money on with C-suite, with management consultants is like an unbiased outside observer to help them connect the dots across a lot of stuff and give them an honest opinion. Well, we think AI is going to be pretty good at that too.
So right now, let me think how to frame this. You're working in conjunction with companies like Asana or ClickUp or those types of places. But one could also consider, if you have this dashboard, all right, we're having this team meeting on project XYZ. As a chief of staff, let me pull up my Ambient dashboard, go to that project and show it on the screen, and everyone can be working literally off the same sheet of music. And they'll have some of the inputs they forwarded their emails on in that project. Yes?
It's a one pager, AI powered, everything you need to know about a project that is a shareable asset amongst the team, a single source of truth. And yes, there will be context from hallway conversations that we don't initially pick up,
Right.
from late night phone calls, from a deck that maybe we didn't have access to. But that's what the humans are like. But we're going to get you 80% of the way there. Of like, this is the starting point. I like your single sheet of music metaphor.
And even that, I'm thinking I would send myself an email. I would like bullet point a conversation I just had that was important about project XYZ, and I would just forward that to myself or forward that to Ambient. So that's how I would get around that workaround.
Yeah, and one of the cool things you can do with our email tool is like we have our prompting under the hood, right? Because we're after very specific things like task extraction and timelines and
Mhm.
project owners. But imagine having a long email thread about like travel logistics to Denver, for example. And you forward that to Ambient and say, can you let me know what time I need to be at the airport in Denver? And so we'll give you a summary with that, make sure it hits all the key points from our standard prompting, but you will be able to influence the prompt through the copy of the email.
Interesting. Okay. So you're making a bet on access for hours saved.
Yeah, access for hours saved, but also this AI backstop concept. I think the value prop is like some people respond to give me 10 hours back and I know what to do.
Heck
And some
yes.
people are living in this world of high stress, many chiefs of staff where their little notebook is the last thing preventing their company from crashing into the rocks because these are the things that have to get done. And it's nobody else's job because these are all exceptions. And so it's a stressful way to live your life. And can AI help be a backstop for the chief of staff?
Gotcha. Okay. So much great information. So, Lawrence, thank you for sharing. If people want to know more about how you work with Matt? I know you have a presentation and a slide deck on that. And then obviously, if they want to know more about Ambient, where do they go for those two things?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. I love to connect with chiefs of staff. And then ambient.us is the company domain. Of course, we'd love to talk to you about that.
Beautiful. Well, it's exciting. I literally, as a chief of staff, I would have loved to have something like this. So I'm excited to see how it develops and progresses. So hopefully you can come on again and share the next iterations and the next updates you have with Ambient in the future. So thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.